Thank you, Louis, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Sustainability Scope 3 Emissions and Cost Model demonstration. My name is Andrew Lynch. I'm a brand technical specialist. And today we're going to cover a number of items. First of all, we'll start with where you can download the Accelerator Catalog for this asset from. It's a very easy process. We'll have a quick look and overview of the model in terms of its definition, and then we'll jump straight into the demonstration, looking at a number of items based around a real-world industry scenario in which the customer had over 100,000 employees. And we'll look at how the sustainability and procurement departments can work together in order to look at the projected spend in emissions. They'll look at the suppliers that they use and look at their footprints to see which supplier they might want to use for a particular product. We'll have a look at some classic forecasting. We'll look at creating some scenarios in order to do some comparisons and also create some private sandbox comparisons so that we can have a look at some what-if scenarios. And then we'll finish with a recap and review of what we've covered in this session. To access the Accelerator Catalog, there's a URL which you'll be given access to, where you can simply click on the download button in order to download everything you need for this particular asset. In essence, this particular model helps with the sustainability scenarios and decision making between or in conjunction between the procurement and sustainability departments. It's really designed for all procurement departments, since most procurement departments will need to buy something for their business. So in conclusion, this model will help with the decision making in terms of cost and sustainability. Okay, so let's look at the first tab, which we call the Overview tab. This could be your initial landing page, and this is an example that we put together. Now, first of all, you'll notice on the left-hand side that we've created a simple workflow incorporating the Sustainability Scope 3 model. This is just to show and to highlight that this particular model doesn't have to be used in isolation. You can actually incorporate it into, for example, a workflow with your other IBM assets. Now on this first tab, you'll notice that you've got 3 different examples of how we can display the information within our model. So looking at this first section here, the model methodology, we'll go into a little bit more detail in this later on. But the main takeaways are that there's certain information that is required for this model to work efficiently. In particular, your spend data, your future spend budget, and of course your desired emission ceiling. This information is then processed using the IBM Watson Studio suite, and also for optimization, it's using the Cplex optimization structure, which we'll look at a little bit further on. We've also got different examples of how you can display the information utilizing the great visualization engine within this particular tool. On each of the items that you see here, you can actually hover the mouse in order to get the exact figures and data at any point. You're able to drill up or drill down on information. So for example, on the emissions footprint by supplier, we may just be interested in looking at bags. So that's no problem. So we can see our product bags across our 3 suppliers. And again, there's different functionality that we can use in order to filter on exactly what we want to be looking at here. So it's a nice, quick visual representation of the data. So now we'll look at our next tab, which is the projected spend and emissions. Now, first thing I should point out is that you can actually import your demand from your ERP system at any time by clicking on this button here. Now, in this model, you'll notice that we have 3 products. We actually have 3 suppliers as well, which we'll look at a little bit later on. So for our 3 products, we have actuals data for 2019 through to 2021, and we're currently in 2022, where we're looking to input our future demand in units. Now, there are 2 ways in which we can do this. We can input the information manually into the system, or we can use the built-in AI functionality. Now, to input the information manually, so for example, one method would be if in, for example, January 2022, I know that my demand in units is going to be 25,000. I can simply enter in the total amount for January 2022 and it will be split across the products. Alternatively, I can use the spreading functionality by inputting a weighing number against each of my products. So for bags we'll have 3, bottles 2, and we'll put 2 for pallets as well. I can now enter in my 25,000 again, and it will use these weighing factors in order to split the figures out. The quickest way within this model in order to get your projected demand in units for the forthcoming year would be to select your products or product, and then to use the forecast button. Now, this forecast button utilizes the IBM AI technology. This is, after all, IBM Planning Analytics with Watson. So by clicking on this button, it brings up this forecast window. Now, the end user can now come in here and they can put in their start and end point. So in this example, we're starting with January 2022 to December 2022. Now, what I can do is click on the preview tab in order to get some sort of idea of what the system has projected for me. So as you can see here, we have our actuals data up to January 2022, and this is what the system is projecting for our bags product. And we can change to have a look at bottles or any of the products. You'll also notice here, which we'll look into a little bit deeper in a short while, is that the predictive accuracy the model is telling me is high. What we could also do for the data scientists there among you is actually have a look at the statistical details. So what we can do is we can break out the measures of error and model fit. So this is giving us our KPI indicators, our KPI factors. We can hover on each one to find out a little bit more about it, and we can put the values in here. So this is effectively the back-end calculations which go to producing our projected forecast. Now, I believe that there are 9 models running in the background, and what we're seeing here is 3 of those 9 models that the system has selected for this particular model and this particular scenario that we're using. If our procurement manager is now happy with what he's seen, he can then click the forecast button in order to project that forecast. What we could also do, we've got our projection, but in February 2022, I know that this figure is not quite correct, and so I'd like to change that to 23,000. Now, because I've made a manual adjustment to February 2022, I can also add a comment in here just to let people know that this is a manual adjustment. I can put my comment in here. I can now post that. So now you'll see a little green corner of the cell is highlighted, indicating to me that there is a comment in here. So anybody can come and have a look at the comment and see exactly what I put in. And of course, you can select the comment and delete it at any point that you see wish. The next KPI in the list that we can look at is the total procurement budget. And again, we've now got our projection for January to December 2022, and we can update these numbers manually as we did before. And the final KPI to do with the sustainability is, of course, our defined emission ceiling. Now, this particular aggregation, we could aggregate at the top level for the whole company. We could add our emission ceiling for each product that we're going to buy, or we can define a maximum amount of CO2 emissions in total. And As you can see, we've got here the trend per product, and again, it's got the full drill down functionality, so we can have a look at the current year now that we've got our projected forecast. And actually, I'm interested in looking at bottles, so let's have a look at the bottles. And again, you can drill up and drill down as you so wish. The next tab that we're going to look at is the supplier footprints. Now, this consists of information and data that I've received from the suppliers, or that data that I may have in my warehouse. Now, within this model, we have two KPIs, one for energy CO2 in kilograms and one for unit costs. But first of all, look at the CO2 in kilograms. Now, with this information, I can clearly see for January 2022, if I compare the two suppliers that I have data for, Box Inc. and Ball AG, I can clearly see that my first supplier for each unit is not as sustainable as my second supplier. My second supplier for each unit is coming out with 800 grams as opposed to 4.5 kilograms. Now, there is no data for the third supplier here, and this is because they either haven't supplied us with the information, or we don't have any information for them in our warehouse. The next KPI that we can look at is the unit costs. And if we look at the same data again, January 2022, I can see that by far my first supplier, Box Inc., is extremely reasonable in terms of unit cost compared to my second supplier. One of the other notable areas of interest on this particular tab is the general ESG weighting. This relates to the ESG data providers, and it's data provided by companies such as Bloomberg with regards to the general supplier footprint. So I can see at a very high level across my three suppliers that my first supplier is extremely sustainable, more sustainable than my second supplier, but this supplier has been improving over the years. Okay, so now let's go on to look at the forecasting part of this model, which is probably one of the more interesting parts. The next model that we're going to look at is the next tab is the forecast tab. So now that we have some demand in the system for 2022, we can manually plan, for example, bags for 2022, and we can actually update our order in units manually, and we can see how that affects our data. For example, I can take the demand in units for January to April, and I can say I want to see how that's going to look if we use this first supplier. Alternatively, I can then take the remaining demand in units and I can put that against the second supplier. Okay, so in this last example, you can see that our total procurement spend against our budget was not quite in line. Our budget was a lot less than our spend, and here are the results highlighted for us on this model, so it's nice and easy to identify. So you can see there are lots of different combinations. We could mix and match between the two suppliers. We only have the two suppliers because this supplier either we don't have any information for this supplier, or they haven't supplied us with relevant information. So as you can see, this is very complex. There are lots of different possibilities and combinations. So the question is, which one is the most optimum? What we can now do is switch over to the optimization part of the scenario to do a comparison. Okay, so the next tab that we look at in conjunction with the forecast tab is the scenario compare tab. Now on this particular tab we have a number of parameters, and on this one I've actually filtered on bags so that we can compare it back to our forecast tab, which was filtered on bags also. In this particular scenario we've got 4 different scenarios, but the system can handle an unlimited number of different scenarios. So with the help of the iLog Cplex mechanism, the system will automatically calculate these scenarios for us. And by the help of the TI process, we can also configure the iLog Cplex. So let's have a look. So first of all, we need to click here on this button. And for my first scenario, I'm going to make this a cost-based scenario. So we will call this cost optimize. So we're going to make this our first optimization. And because it's cost optimized, we're not so worried about sustainability. So we can change this figure from 60% to 5%, 100% meaning that it's very sustainable. So now we should see this now change, and the figures have been updated. We'll add another scenario in there because we're interested in sustainability as well. We'll put this against our sustainability optimized 2 scenario, and because this is sustainability, we're going to make this 100%. And again, this will now update, and you'll see this update shortly. There we go. So now what we can do is we can go back to our forecast tab. And whereas before we entered the numbers manually, what we can now do is we can actually use the functionality within the system to actually calculate for us which is the best supplier based on whether we're looking at, we want to be optimized based on cost or sustainability. So what we can do is I can change my scenario here to the optimized one. So based on cost, the system is telling me, based on all the information that's in the system, that the first supplier would be the best one to go for. And if we then look if we're then looking at sustainability, the system is now telling me that the second supplier would be the best one for us to use. And this will match back to the scenario, the data on the scenario compare tab. But we can simply select our scenario. Remember, we have an unlimited number of different scenarios that we can have, and the system will pull back the information for us in real time. It is possible to have a mix. So if we change our products to, for example, the bottles, you can see that the system is telling us for certain months, one supplier would be better. For other months, maybe another supplier would be better. This could be because over time, from month to month, a supplier could be making themselves more sustainable by improving their production process. Another constraint that we could put within this model is actually to put a minimum amount. For example, we could say that we want a minimum of $5 million at the first supplier, and we could put that into the system as another scenario. And then once we've got our results, we can actually export our results by clicking on this button, the export results to ERP, and this will export the results to our ERP model. And finally, we'll look at the Sandbox Compare tab. Now, this basically will give us a private, put us into a private simulation mode. So this enables us to be able to create a private simulation, tweak the figures, so we can then, for example, go to our suppliers and say, we'd like you to change the unit price of your product from, for example, 60 cents to 20 cents. But before we call the supplier, we can actually have a look at what the effect of that might be within the system using this tab. So let's have a look. So on here, we're going to create a brand new private simulation. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to delete out all of the previous simulations that were created so that we're now just looking at the base raw data. So I can click on base, create a new tab, and we'll call this best case. So as you can see, the base and best case data is always the same. So what we can now do is we can now tweak some of these figures. So For example, we're saying that we could be wondering and want to simulate if the unit price wasn't 60 cents, what if it were 20 cents? So the system now updates, and we can now see the effects of that by the colored cells over here on this chart. So we can see the effects of, we can see the original base figure and our new private simulation scenario best case. So again, we can then experiment with changing prices and see how that's going to affect our data in the system. So it's nice to be able to use planning analytics for the sustainability and procurement departments to be able to use both use the planning analytics functionality.
So to recap, we've covered how you download the Accelerator Catalog in order to gain access to this asset. We've had a quick look at the model overview, and then we jumped into the demonstration where we had a look at the initial landing page. We had a look at the different methods in which you can use in order to project your spend and emissions. We've looked at the supplier footprints, whereby you can see the footprint for particular suppliers in order to choose the best supplier for your needs. We reviewed some forecasting, setting up scenarios for comparison, and also we've had a look at the Sandbox comparison process. To recap, you now have a fact-based starting point or strategy for decisions between your sustainability and procurement departments, which will hopefully lead to cost savings and better sustainability. Thank you, and over to you, Louis.